Hi, Brittany. This is Professor Evans with feedback on your SA2, the rhetorical analysis. So, as always, when we start thinking about feedback, we think about, well, what were the criteria we were looking for here? An effective introduction that would engage an audience, a clear thesis as to what you're arguing, a clear structure to the essay. Why is the order of operations the way that it is? Specific examples to support assertions that we're making. A fairly limited scope, that we're not trying to do too much in this essay in terms of what we're looking at. Try to narrow it down to maybe one, maybe two elements at most. And also not getting trapped into the argument that the writer's making. So if they're arguing about torture, that you're not arguing that torture is good or bad, but rather arguing about the rhetorical effectiveness of it. So one of the nice things about this is I do think that you accomplished a lot of those things here. So I'm seeing many of the features that we were wanted to achieve in this paper. I do agree, you kind of mentioned in your cover letter that I do think that your introduction and conclusion are probably some of the weaker areas of it, but not bad. You start off, I think it's interesting, starting off with this idea of the paradox here. Perhaps you could play with that a little bit more, kind of tease that out into a couple of sentences about why is that difficult in terms of rhetoric. And so his position is that you're kind of talking about that it seems illogical that we would want to defend something or that something that seems bad by its very nature. So maybe if you could tease that out, why that would be difficult, and how would you need to approach that for an audience as well. I think one of the things I had said in the prompt was this idea of talking about the effectiveness is or is not effective, does a good job, does not do a good job. And I think if you added that word here, so Harris effectively conveys this argument through a strong use of pathos and logos. Small thing as well, usually when you mention things in a thesis, it should be in the order that you talk about them in the paper. So you talk about pathos second, and you talk about logos first. So you need to flip-flop those, because those should kind of represent how you're going through the paper as well. I think your logos sections are really strong. I think you're taking some very difficult ideas and you're kind of like, and logos, I will tell you, is the most difficult of all of these to kind of explain out. Pathos can be usually pretty easy. You can point to and say, oh, look at these words that he's using here. And ethos, it's pretty easy, can be easy. Where you can sit there and say, oh, see, look, he's establishing himself here with his position as well. Logos is harder, but sometimes it also, you need to kind of have a more global vision of the paper. Oh, he starts here and then he moves to this, and then he goes back and reminds the reader of this, and then he goes forward to here. So it usually is a very step-by-step kind of argument based. And so that was nice when you did this here. So Harris also appeals to logic when he argues about whether or not the equivalence between torture, up close and personal, and collateral damage, distant and detached, whole. So I mean, I really liked how you kind of like use those different ways to kind of unpack it as well. Small point here, remember that ellipses are only going to be used in between, in quotes where you have taken something out of the middle, not when the quote starts halfway or it continues after. So just in the middle as well, so you don't need to do that. I'll tell you the part of the paper that I almost think you don't need. The pathos section, I think you do a really good job of going through the logos, and then you get to the pathos, and it's fairly, I mean, you're talking about pictures of 7-year-old girls asphyxiated in a warehouse. You pick the easy, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, about pathos, examples of children's and infants. So all this is done really well. But it also is, as I said, it's kind of easy pickings as well. I think after your really effective logos sections earlier, I got the impression that maybe you don't want to do pathos at all. I would almost suggest maybe find another logos section in the essay and continue to unpack that. So then what you're doing overall is just talking about how he is logically approaching this paradox that you pointed out in the introduction right there. How do you logically argue for something that would seem morally reprehensible as well? And I think that might work. One of the other things you might think about is look on page 2. When he's talking, there's the second and third whole paragraph where he's talking about Gandhi. So he's setting up this very clear idea about Gandhi and his pathicism. I can't seem to be able to say that word today for some reason. That he sets up an idea saying, oh, well, if we all followed Gandhi's rule, then it wouldn't apply to every situation. And so look at this example. So Gandhi said that the Jews during the Second World War should have just committed mass suicide to bring the attention to the world to the Nazi Germany. And then Harris kind of goes on as so, but if he had done that, so then he kind of logically goes on to the next step, talking about this idea of how would this play out? If all the good people did this, then we would end up being in trouble, because then all the good people would just kill themselves as to kind of throwing themselves on the altar of the evil. So and there are other examples of logos you could do throughout the paper. So I get the impression, maybe strip out all the pathos and just do logos to really hone it in. But overall, I think you have a very solid paper. Think about the introduction, think about the conclusion, think about sharpening your thesis just a little bit, and think about possibly stripping out the pathos and adding in additional logos examples. All right, I hope this was helpful.